You're listening to Paris: A State of Mind on Paris Underground Radio. For more great content, join us on Patreon at patreon.com/Paris Underground Radio.
Welcome to Paris: A State of Mind. Join us as we talk about the good, the bad, the ins, the outs of property rentals and purchases in and around Paris. We'll have topics for renters, owners, and visitors, share questions we are regularly asked, and more. My name is Gail Boisclair of Perfectly Paris, and my co-host is Marie Pistinier of Lokim Paris. Be a part of it. Both of us are proud members of the SPLM, the first representative body of furnished rental professionals. Hello, Marie. How are you?
Hi, Gail. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. And hello to all of our listeners.
Hello to everyone.
You know, remember that series when I was asking people about living in different areas and things like that?
Sure.
I don't know if you remember, but a couple of different people asked about flood zones in Paris.
Yeah, so that's weird because it sounds a bit scary, right?
Well, yeah. And I thought that that would be a good idea for us to do a topic on, because the people that did mention it, they were Americans, and they said it's something that's very important for them to know, that when purchasing a property, if it's in a flood zone area or not, or if they should purchase something by the water, the sea, and so on. So let's talk about that today.
Yeah, sure. Pleasure.
And so getting into that, how do they know? Like, how does somebody find out if they're in a flood zone? Do they have to go to the mairie? Is it in some report or?
When you purchase a place, wherever in France, not only in Paris, and even when you rent, you have what we call the diagnostics. And we already mentioned the diagnostics, but we talked more about energetic performances, the size of the apartment and stuff like that. But one of the diags is about the risk, and the name is a state of risk and pollution of the soil, for example. And it's,
Oh,
yeah, I know.
that's scary sounding. Oh my goodness. Like state of risk and pollution of the soil.
Yes, like, you know, when you sign, how do you say, like in décharge, like, okay, now I'm going to sign up for something very scary.
Yeah, like you're built on a gravesite.
Yeah. So it's not that scary, but it's important to have that, and it's a bit reassuring because it means that you know the things before signing up. So the diagnostic, the name is ERP, État des risques et des pollutions, which informs the future occupants of a home of natural, mining, and technological risks to which they are exposed. And this, for example, includes like floods, avalanche. Do you say avalanche?
Avalanche, yeah.
Avalanche, very pretty much the same.
Avalanche sounds so much nicer.
Forest fires, or industrial accident, nuclear exposure, or seismic and mining risk, of course. And now we have the radon gas, which is added to the diagnostics.
Wow.
And also, of course, floods are a part of this.
Well, I can just imagine now. I can see all of a sudden everything's moving around the Seine. So does that mean we're going to like be at risk to have a tsunami or something like that?
No, not exactly. Feel really reassured, especially as you are living in the 18th, so you are very far from the Seine.
True.
But what the technicians are fearing since many years is what we call the centennial flood, which is not a flood that can arrive like once in every 100 years, but it has one chance over 100 to occur each year.
Uh-huh.
So it's a risk that we can face in Paris, for example.
And do you remember when it last happened? I can't remember.
So I was not born. It was in...
But was I born? I'm older.
No. You weren't. No. It was in 1910, and everyone has that in mind, and especially because there is some picture of it, and we saw people on like a wooden planche, like in order to do not be too wet, and the Seine raised up to more than 8.62 meters above the Seine beds.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Insane.
Yeah, it's fully insane, completely. So since then, there is some reservoirs who have been built up to try to avoid that and to regulate the flow, if I can say so. But it doesn't prevent us from having another episode that could happen one day. And it's in Paris, but it's also Île-de-France, because some of the cities close by are crossed by other rivers. So it's not only Parisian; it's really for people close to the rivers.
Mm-hmm. didn't it happen again, like almost after 1910? I thought it was like a few years ago, maybe 2016 or something. There was like a crazy amount of rain. And I remember something about stuff in the Louvre being taken out and stored elsewhere for risk of getting damaged.
Yeah, that's exactly. That was around that time. And the level was pretty high because we had massive rain for few days and week, I would say. And in the force where I live in particular, for example, and I'm not that far from the Seine, we started to think about how we can prevent that. And I remember my neighbor had some sandbags that he started to put, especially because we were on the ground floor and he had a suplex. So he was worried that even if the Seine is raising up, like you have a few centimeters, then it will go down and it would damage the thing. So luckily it didn't went that far. It just stayed at the level of the banks, but it was, yeah. And of course, every time this happened, then people are talking about the Centennial flood.
Yeah, it's true. And is the water that comes, like you mentioned something about other places being at risk, but so it's not just water coming from the Seine?
It's not only the Seine who is responsible for that, but we have several rivers around Paris. We have the Seine, we have the Marne, we have the Oise and the Loing, which start in a little further up in Seine-et-Marne.
Okay, so it's just like the biggest area, though, is probably going to be, I guess, the area around the Seine is at risk, really.
Yeah, sure. This is flood-prone areas are located along the banks of the Seine. It can be a bit extended also because it depends. There is a lot of things to take into consideration in Paris. Is that you have the subway and that all the tunnels you have down underground. So this can also, like the water can go into that. So eventually it avoid to be on the ground, but it's important to have that. And there is some arrondissements, such as, for example, the 8th or the 9th, who can be at stake, depending on the area itself, because it really depends. But people and scientists are doing some simulations to see how the flood would go, and if there is this amount of water up to where it could go.
Well, I can't imagine. That would be crazy to have water all the way up to the 8th or the 9th or something like that. But also I can see what you're saying, the logic of it going through as well with all the metro stations, and the water can just flow through all of there and affect many other areas of the city. So I guess it sounds like at some point it is possible that it could happen again in the future. So does the city have some sort of plan of action to advise people how to deal with an apparent flood and things like that?
Yeah, of course. It's it's something that is known, like, since a long time. So people are working on that. As I was saying, like, there is some scientists who are making some simulation to see how things would go. And so on the website of the City Hall, which is paris.fr, you can have, there is a special pages on the flood itself. And so they do give some tips, okay, what if it's happened? What should I do? So it could be, for example, of course, you check if your insurance policy covers the risk of flooding, which can be very important. And not only with Paris, I would say, because we didn't talk about that, but in France, the flooding areas can be along the sea, along the rivers, sometimes. And it's very important because sometimes we build up houses, we build up buildings and everything that were not supposed to be built at this particular place. So it's important, and it's important to verify that in your insurance you have this risk cover. For going back to Paris in particular, of course, we don't have, I don't think we mentioned that a lot in our podcast, but we are very lucky when we have a cave, we have a cellar or somewhere where we can store our belongings, but it's pretty rare. And often it's like very humid because it's on the ground. And especially when you are closer to the Seine, the more humid your cave is. But of course, for those who have things in their cellar, it's important to store them elsewhere or to elevate them in order to make sure that there is no too much damage. And of course, you have to check all the equipments that you have. You make sure that you don't leave any valuable objects in your basement. It's very important. And they say, but I think it's a bit too much from now, but you can also prepare, of course, emergency kits once you heard about things such as water, non-perishable food, clothes, batteries, stuff like that. So we shouldn't be too much to give too much catastrophism on that. But I mean, everything is written on the Paris City Hall website. So it's information that are accurate in some point.
So yeah, Paris, PARIS.fr, the city's website. That's really good advice. And I think a lot of foreigners that come from places where they have to deal with flooding, hurricanes, earthquakes, and things like that can definitely relate. I know before living in Paris, I was actually living on a Caribbean island and we had to deal with hurricanes all the time. And anytime there were hurricanes coming, I basically had to move everything off of the ground, put it on, say, my bed or just above the ground. But one time secure my windows and so on. But one time my roof actually flew off.
Wow.
So all of the saving, protecting everything by putting it on the bed didn't really matter when you have no roof, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I swear. And I had one of those mattresses that actually had coils, years ago when they used to have coils in mattresses made of metal. My mattress was so saturated that when I removed everything off of the bed, there were rust rings of where the coils were on the mattress.
Wow. No, impressive. Luckily, we are far from that in Paris.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, having said that, okay, we get, of course, lots of notice because we would be watching on the news the path of the hurricane, so we could prepare ourselves a little bit. But obviously, there's not like a little site, I don't think, where we can watch the increase of the water, or maybe there is a little site where we can watch the increase of the water.
So far, I don't believe there is, but one of the things which is important is that it doesn't happen in an hour. Like if there is this kind of problem, it will take a few days, eventually a few weeks, where people are going to be worried. When I say people, scientists and people in meteorologists who are going to, everything is under not control, but is checked and screened all the time. So if there is really at a certain point where they are going to say, okay, the flood is going to be major and there will be more water than we can expect and everything, we will know that few days before. It will not be like from a day to another. The water doesn't come up this way. So of course, we will have few days to get organized. So which is, of course, putting away and upstairs all the documentations or papers you need. Make sure in the cellar, it's a very important and interesting advice from the CTO, like make sure that in the cellar, you don't leave any element that can cause a pollution. Because of course, this is where we can have paint can and things like that, which is definitely what we store in basement and in cellar in Paris. But of course, it's very important to remove that in order to make sure that once the water comes there, then we don't have a massive pollution on that.
That's a good point.
Yeah. I would, preparing the topic we were going to talk about, it was one of the things that I thought, okay, I wouldn't have thought about that. And it's very important.
Yeah. And I think that it's only because these particular people, they said it's really something to consider when purchasing a property.
Yeah.
In certain parts of North America.
So the thing is that you will have, of course, few days to get organized and to make sure that the thing is, if you can leave the city, then leave the city, and information will be on the Parisian website. It will be on the internet. I'm sure it will be all over the news because this kind of major event will be on the headlines all the time. Going back to the question you had on the previous podcast from the American people willing to be in Paris and being a bit worried.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is an important thing. Like it's something that can happen. That like it's a centennial flood.
It's rare.
It's very rare.
Yeah.
And what is important is that in fact you have the diagnostics which says, depending on which area of Paris, if you are in the flood zone. And for France in general, more generally, it's important as well because it will say if this is at risk or not. And then depending on where it is, where you purchase or where you rent, maybe you can take some additional information on the global risk. Are you too close from the sea? Like right now, we talk a lot about the rise of the ocean and of the sea because of climate change. So of course, more and more people will need to be further away from the sea or from the rivers. But even in small village, for example, my parents, which are in the Paris suburbs, then of course you have some river which are not as big as the Seine, but some of the housings that are close by to those small rivers, when it comes, and because it's the rivers, like every little drop come and become bigger, it can make a lot of damages. So it's an important topic to know when you purchase a place. Along other, because we didn't mention it, but of course in these diagnostics, we have much more information, like there is a flood zone, but there is also the quarry, which can happen in Paris because we are, what we call, often we say we are on a gruyere. like, which is, I don't know if you have so much Gruyere in the English speaking country, but when you are in Gruyere, it's a cheese with a lot of hole in it. So this is the way we picture Paris, because with all the subway, the metro, and the stations underground, there is of course they had to dig. So of course, some of the buildings below, there is a lot of tunnels around. So, and as we mentioned when we started, there is all the risks, natural and radon, like gas radon. It could be scary, or nuclear exposure.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Paris is like a big piece of Swiss cheese or Gruyere. If you're enjoying this episode of Paris, A State of Mind, you may also be interested in our sister podcast, Don't Miss This. Join Jennifer weekly for the scoop on what's happening in Paris. Paris, A State of Mind will be right back after a word from our sponsors. And now back to Paris, A State of Mind. Talking about like quarries and other things like that, I mean, we should get more into these topics in future episodes because, for example, in Montmartre, everyone knows that they've dug so much underneath the city and with the buildings shifting and so on and so forth. There are some buildings that even an apartment that I manage, and then there's another apartment that a friend manages. They're both on Rue Coulancourt. And it shifted so much. The building that my friend manages, the door, the entrance to the building, it's got metal all around it to support it because it's shifted so much.
You are going to scare every listener who wants to come to Paris and who are going to say, oh gosh, we shouldn't go there. No, but it's true. You're right. But it's like in some on the, even though when you are not in Paris, because of dryness, like for example the sécheresse. Okay, the housings of the building are living their own life. Like okay, it's shifting when it's cold, when it's warm, when it's humid, it's moving and everything. Sometimes it's a bit scarier than the others. By chance, it's not all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, we don't usually when there is a crack on the wall, we are not that much surprised in Paris, unless we are in a very, very brand new building.
Well, yeah, old buildings shift. That's just a part of life because, as you say, they do have their own movement. And even doors, like you say, because so many of them are made out of wood, that I know at my old apartment, my door would expand and contract with the weather. So much so that sometimes I couldn't even hardly double lock my door.
Yeah, we have that in our office. Like we are not in a boutique. We are in an office which is on the third floor. And the elevator during the summer, when you take so it's on the third floor, so you can definitely go back and take the stairs when you are on the way back. But on the way up, I have to say that the stairs are a bit wide and steep, so usually I'm taking that. But when you want to go on the way down, it's impossible to, you open the door, but then the door doesn't close. It's iron, but it's like expanded, so the door cannot be closed. And if it's not closed, then the security shutters inside cannot close, and then you cannot go down. So yeah, it's an interesting, lively.
The buildings are alive.
Sounds like Stephen King novels.
Do. Maybe it is. Maybe we should have waited to talk about this around Halloween.
Yeah, exactly. We should do something else.
Well, I think that was very interesting, and certainly I'm sure it'll be informative for a lot of our listeners, but we'll definitely have to get into more detail about some of the other diagnostic things, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, thanks very much for all your great information.
Thank you, Gail.
And what we said is, again, they can look up all that information as well on the website www.paris, spelt like the city, .f come France, R come, well, the second letter in France. Oh, F come frigging radon. FR. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Bye for now.
Talk to you soon.
Bye. Thanks for listening to Paris, A State of Mind, featuring Gail of Perfectly Paris and Marie of Loquim, both who are founding members of the SPLM. Paris, A State of Mind is produced by Paris Underground Radio. The music, Jazz in Paris, is by Media Right Productions. For more information on this show and others, go to parisundergroundradio.com.
This episode of Paris: A State of Mind was produced by Jennifer Garrity for Paris Underground Radio. For more great content, join us on Patreon at patreon.com/Paris Underground Radio.